So welcome to the very first web event series of a 12-part series. So we're going to be doing this once a month for the Scientists in the Parks program. And this month's topic is going to be on unlocking grad school, a student discussion. And all of web events are going to be hosted by Ecological Society of America. If you're just joining us, please share your name and your information, who you are in the chat box, so we can kind of get to familiarize each other with one another. Next slide. So my name is Jessica Johnston. I'm an education programs coordinator with the Ecological Society of America. I partner with the Scientists in the Parks program. I typically manage a small subset called the Fellows that only happens in the summertime. But as part of my role at ESA is to kind of try and increase the engagement and enrichment of the Scientists in the Parks program. So one of the ways that we're trying to do that is by hosting some webinar events. This one being about unlocking grad school, but we're going to have some other great events coming up, probably once a month, and depending on some months, it might even be 2 in a month. So just keep your ear to the ground or read your emails as they come through from your program coordinators to see what more events are down the pike. But I really appreciate you coming to our first event. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce my colleague. Jessie, you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessie. I am the Society Programs Program Coordinator. Along with my menagerie of things that I do at ESA, I also help out Jessica with the SIP Fellows Program. Thank you all for coming.
Yes, I could not do it without Jessie. So we're the two faces you'll probably see the most if you come to these webinar series events. Sometimes both of us, sometimes just one or the other. But that's just to kind of give you a sense of what to expect. You can go to the next slide, Jessie. So let's talk about the process, right? And this is really the process for most of the webinar events we'll be hosting, but specifically today, we want you to know that we've invited 3 grad students to be on a panel, and we're going to have kind of an informal Q&A session with them. So we want you to join the questions. We want you to, ask as much as you can. This is the benefit of you. I would just say that, for the sake of background noise, don't unmute, just raise your little hand and then we'll unmute you, or we'll ask you to unmute so that we can have clear voices spoken. But keep your mics muted in between. And then, you're welcome to post comments or questions in the chat box at any time throughout this event. And I just want to say this is being recorded. So if there's any information you missed, you want to go back, you can watch it again. We'll be happy to share this with you. You can go to the next slide, Jessie. Okay, so this is the intro. We're in it, the first 10 minutes. And then we're going to go into the Q&A with the panelists. I've prepared some questions for them, but I don't expect that I'll have all of the questions that you have in your minds and hearts. So if you find that you have a question, feel free to ask it. If we're finding that we have a ton of questions and we can't answer them all at the same time, what we'll do is we'll do breakout rooms, and we'll only do it for 10 minutes. And I'll talk about who will be where and why you might want to join that breakout room. But that's something to keep in mind. And that's only, if we feel like we need to answer a lot of the questions. And then finally, and not least, I want to have a grad school resource sharing session. I've asked the panelists to maybe share some of their own resources that they use to get into grad school. I will try to share some of mine. Jessie will also share some that we've compiled. But if you have any along the way, we'll ask you to share those too, because, you never know what's going to help somebody. We got somebody in the waiting room. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so this is Jessie's slide. Go for it, Jessie.
All right, I'll take on over. So you got to know us a little bit. It's time for us to get to know you guys a little more. So I'm going to launch a poll here just to get an idea of who we have. Feel free to answer, and then I'll share the responses once you submit it. So the questions that we want to answer is, what grade level are you? What degree you want to pursue? Have you looked into any programs? Have you contacted any schools yet?
I love these answers, by the way.
Thank you.
They're very clever.
I tried to be funny, so if I made you laugh, thank you.
So we could probably end the poll because this says 12 out of 13. I didn't do the poll.
Right.
So I'm guessing I'm one of them. So we're sharing the results, right? And it seems like, wow, we've got a lot of people who recently graduated and some that have been out of college for a while. Totally okay. And then for what degrees, we've got a good mix. Okay, yeah, and there's some people that are just don't know why they want to be, they're even here. Okay, that's totally fine. All right, so there's nobody that's looked in, so everybody, 75% have looked into programs, and then some don't know where to begin. Okay, so that's like a big polarity, and that happens a lot in grad school, and we can talk a little bit about that for sure. And then it looks like it's 50-50 if you've contacted schools or not already. Cool, so we can stop sharing. That's really informative, I think. Panelists, do you think that's informative? Awesome, so we know we have the full spectrum here, and that's good to know. Okay, next slide, please. So the real reason we're here is to let the students talk. The student panelists today are all SIP or former SIP alum. Noah Angel is an MS student at Humboldt State University. He's doing a master's thesis-based. Guadalupe Maldonado Andrade, I'm sorry if I said that wrong, Guadalupe, is a PhD student at UC Riverside, and Jolie Tooley is an MS student at SUNY Environmental Studies and Forestry. So, Jesse, if you don't mind, stop sharing screen. We're gonna just have a conversation with the grad students now. And let's start with Noah. Since you're the newest to the grad school world, why don't you just give us an introduction of who you are, you know, what program you're in, what year you are in, and anything else you want to share about yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Noah Angel. I just started my first semester at Humboldt State University in Northern California. I'm studying fisheries, and it's a thesis-based master's. Yeah.
That's a solid start, Noah. Guadalupe, you want to go next?
Sure. So I'm a PhD student here at UC Riverside in the plant biology department. I did get my master's 2 years ago from Cal State Fullerton in geography and the environment. So I went from a mix of humanities department to a fully science department. So if anyone's interested in making that kind of shift, I'm here for any questions.
Thanks, Guadalupe. Jolie, you want to go next?
Yep. So my name is Jolie Tooley. I am a MPS student, which stands for Masters of Professional Studies. And I have 1 semester left, so I guess I'm technically in my 2nd year. Yay. And my MPS is in fish and wildlife biology and management, but I also got my bachelor's in wildlife science, kind of the same thing. And I go to SUNY ESF, which is State University of New York, College of Environmental Science and Forestry. It's a mouthful, but we just say ESF.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for introducing yourselves, and thank you for joining us today. So if you can tell, we've intentionally selected not only fantastic students, but people who all have different graduate degree programs. right? So they're all kind of heavily influenced by conservation, environmental, that type of work, but there's still very different paths. There's a very different path from a PhD to a master's to a professional master's. So I have some questions prepared, but if you have burning questions, feel free. We can jump right into questions by you, the audience, or we can kick it off with some of the questions that I have prepared. And you're welcome to either raise your hand or you can put them in the chat box and I can attempt to read them, or I might just call on you and ask you to read your question out loud. But this is, like I said, this is for you. And, you know, I know Zoom burnout's a real thing, but if you have an opportunity, I'd love to see some of your faces during the questions, if not the whole process. I'm not seeing anything happening in the chat box, so I'm just going to jump into some questions. And then if this stirs up some ideas or questions for you, feel free to chime in. Okay, so existential question for you three. When did you decide you wanted to go to grad school and why? And maybe Guadalupe, would kick it off with you because you went to your master's program first and then your PhD. So you must really, really like grad school.
Yeah, so I have always wanted to get my PhD ever since I was in high school. It was a very, very long-term goal of mine. It means a whole lot of a different thing now than before. So the primary reason that I did my master's first, you know, I'm going to be honest. I struggled a lot during undergrad. I was subject to dismissal 3 times on academic probation. It was a really rough journey. It didn't really get better until I started doing research and I was able to narrow my focus on what I was good at, what I really wanted to do. But by that time, I had already this history of a low GPA, and you know, applying to PhDs is very competitive. It's a lot of time, a lot of work, and so I thought I could use that extra step of going through a master's degree, since it's a lot shorter. It's 2 years, so it can really like test me, like, do I really want to do this for 5 years? And in the process, build up my GPA and my research experience. And so after doing my master's, I got that extra cushion of experience of being able to do my own original research. And I loved it. And so it kind of just gave me even more reason to go for the PhD. And it really helped me prepare for applying for a PhD, since I was kind of familiar with writing statements, research proposals, and that sort of thing. But they're very different. Very, very different. I'm enjoying my my PhD program so far. I'm only in my 2nd year. But yeah.
So Guadalupe, for those who don't know, how long is a PhD program typically?
Usually 4 to 5. And usually people, depending on the department, you're there for more than 5. I'm aiming for 5.
Oh, fingers crossed for 5 for you, Guadalupe.
Mm-hmm.
And also kudos to you mentioning that you weren't the best student in undergrad. There's a lot of people out there that, you know, have life happen and, you know, aren't the best, most successful students while they're in their undergrad and don't think that it's even possible to get into grad school. I can raise my hand for that one too. So it is possible. It can happen. Noah, you're super new to grad school. You like 2 months new. What are you thinking? Why did you want to go? When did you decide? What was that process like for you?
Yeah, so I think I decided to I really knew I wanted to go to grad school my senior year of my bachelor's. I started getting into those upper division credits, and we started learning a lot more about research. And actually the labs were more, I guess, research based, and you know, I really liked it a lot, and so I wanted to actually take it to the next level and do my own research. I thought it'd be really cool, you know. So yeah, so I decided to get my master's and applied all over the place, and finally got it. But I can go more into detail about that.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into that. And Jolie, you took a different path than these two. They're talking about how they're excited about research. Can you talk about your decision to go for a professional master's and like maybe just your general understanding of the differences between what they're doing versus what you do?
Yeah. So I pretty much always knew that I wanted to go to grad school, but I didn't really know in what capacity until I was actually like doing my bachelor's and doing college and figuring it out. And I kind of had the opposite experience. I realized that I did not want to do research. I really liked the applied science and the management and the policy and the boots on the ground, if you will, aspect. And so that kind of steered me away from doing something like a PhD. And in my senior year of my bachelor's degree, I kind of talked to some advisors about a master's of professional studies because I'd heard a little bit about it, but I really didn't know it existed until that year. And a lot of professors at my college are research based, and it has been a kind of traditionally looked down upon path to take, especially coming from a research institute. And so me being the stubborn person I am, I was like, no, like I'm going to look more into this because I think it's just as a legitimate, you know, route to take as anything else, not slamming a traditional thesis at all, but it's just not for everyone. And so I, you know, looked more into the program and was like, yeah, this sounds like exactly what I want, because I didn't want to jump right into the job field and have to kind of climb the ladder, if you will. With just a bachelor's, it takes more time to get into permanent positions. So I was like, I want a little bit of a boost with a graduate degree, but wasn't really interested in research. And so it was a really perfect fit for me.
Awesome and very enlightening. You know, it's interesting because you get influenced a lot to do research, especially when you're talking to mentors. And research is not for everyone, and that is absolutely okay because you're still an able-bodied individual that's bright and thinking of new ideas. You just don't want to put yourself through the pain and agony of research. I kind of get that. Some people love it though, and it's perfect for them. Okay, so if anybody if you have a question, you're welcome to raise your hand, or you can add a question into the comment or chat box. I'm going to keep pushing forward unless somebody wants to come forward and ask some questions. Jesse, you let me know if you see anything. Oh, I see something. What do you do if people you reach out to and want to work for don't respond? Okay, so Anna, do you mind unmuting and just talking a little bit more about kind of your experience with that? And then that'll give us a better understanding.
Yeah, sure. Y'all can hear me, yes? Okay, cool. Yeah, so whenever I'm doing research, or like whenever I was looking into different graduate programs, there was a limited number of professors that I was like, oh, like I love their research. It would be so super cool to have them as a advisor. So I contacted them, I sent them my CV and everything. And a lot of them just haven't gotten back to me, and I've sent follow-up emails, but I was wondering, since I've already started the application for the university, should I, like, where do you go from there? Do you just like keep reaching out to people even if you're not super excited about their research, or should I just maybe not apply anymore? I don't know, I'm kind of at a loss for what to do if I just don't get a response.
So what's happening, you happens to a lot of people. So I can talk to it, but I did want to see if any of the panelists want to jump in and answer Anna's question first. I know is probably not an experience Jolie has had, but I don't know about you, Guadalupe, or even you, Noah, how you went about finding your advisors, your mentors, how many times or tries it took before you got a response.
Yeah, that's really common. I have a mentee right now who's going through the same thing. And, you know, I told them, don't feel bad about bugging these professors. Email again, email again. Most likely that usually professors' emails are horrendous and their emails get buried with stuff. So I wouldn't take it personally. You know, unless they reach out to you and then say, no, thank you. But what's important to consider is if that application requires you to have a sponsor. So some schools require that you get at least 2 professors to say, okay, that they're interested in having you as a student. If that's the case, then I wouldn't pursue the application because you're not getting that response, and applications are due in December. But if that's not the case and you don't need those sponsors, I think what would help is if you gather a list of the professors that your research aligns with, and in your statements, make sure to include that your work would align well with this list of professors, because what helps your application is your ability to be placed anywhere. So if one person isn't available to work with you, you're able to work with others, other professors. So that's really important to include in your statement.
Very valid points. And Guadalupe has kind of hit it head on the nail, or whatever those sayings are. I'm terrible at them. I admit that. But so there, you know, there's 2 strategies here. One is you find the mentor or advisor first. And a lot of people, what they do is they utilize their websites, right? So like a lot of professors that are funded will have their own websites, and then they'll post all of their publications. And so you can directly see how their work that's coming out of their lab relates to your interests of research, if that's the path that you want to choose. And this is not to be insensitive, but a lot of professors are really into themselves. They really like their own research. So the more you talk about their research and why it aligns with what you want to do, the more likely you are to get an email back from them. And there's no shame and nothing wrong with just saying, hi, this is just a gentle reminder. I'm in the process of applying. I would like to have a discussion with you. Please let me know if you're available. And sometimes you have to kind of make it a little bit of herding cats. You know, they're very, very busy people. So providing them with days and times that you're available up front shows that you're taking the initiative. And then all they have to do is literally just pick the day and time that you've already put out there for them to set up a meeting. Another way you can do it is because they're students in their labs, you can reach out to the students sometimes, and those students will also usually be on their website. So you can meet with the student, and then the student is a shoo-in for you to meet with the graduate advisor. If they're accepting students, you'll have like a better understanding of that process from the inside looking out. And then finally, all graduate degree programs have graduate degree directors. So having a consultation with the director, being like, I'm very passionate, I want to do research, these are the areas I'm interested in, I've already tried to email these people. Just that conversation will give you an invaluable amount of resources that you didn't know were all of a sudden available. So that's also something to keep in mind. But it's a fantastic question. I would not give up pursuing grad school if it's truly a passion and it's definitely something you want to do. And I will say that life happens, right? So like if you push it off for a semester or even another year, you may not be in a position where you want to do grad school next year. So that's something to consider. I don't want you to rush into a process. It's a lot of money, time, and effort, but it is something to consider before you just, you know, and it's, you know, it sounds like you're pretty interested. So just keep pushing, you know, find those websites or those publications and spur the professor's interest. At the very least, if they don't want to take on a grad student, sometimes they'll recommend a colleague that does similar research as well. You just might have to go to a different school if you're willing to do that. Okay, is there any other questions? You're welcome. Absolutely. Happy to help. Anybody else have any other questions?
Bella's raising her hand.
Oh, go for it, Bella.
Hello.
Hi.
I was just wondering if y'all had any perspectives on graduate programs that are fully funded, like under a professor where you would be doing research with them and receiving some type of sponsorship versus programs that require tuition and are less research-based. Like, is one more legitimate than the other, or does it just have to do with like funding and expenses?
Well, let me ask Noah this real quick. Is your thesis fully funded? And when we are talking about fully funded, you're talking about that your tuition is 100% covered. Is that right, Bella?
That's right.
Okay. Noah, does your program offer that?
Yeah, so my thesis is somewhat funded. It's almost fully funded. So I came in, the only reason I was able to come in was because there was a grant for my research. And so that grant paid for all the research. So I didn't have to, put any money for that. And I also had another grant that paid for most of my tuition. So I do have to pay a bit for my tuition. I pay about $1,500 a semester, which isn't too bad. That's a lot less than what I paid for my bachelor's, so I'm happy about that. But I'm funded a lot more than other students are in my department, is what I've noticed. Some students are not funded at all, and they have to like apply to like multiple grants just to get the money for their research, and then they also have to pay for their actual tuition, or sometimes they actually have to look for scholarships to pay for that tuition. Mm-hmm. So it depends also, but usually these fully funded I guess research positions are really competitive as well. I think that's the reason why I was able to get my position too, is because it wasn't completely fully funded, so there wasn't much people applying to it. And whenever I did apply to fully funded positions where you get tuition fully paid, you get insurance, you get you get tuition paid, your research is fully covered, and you get insurance, you get everything. Those are really competitive, and you usually see those in Texas A&M Job Board. But yeah, those are really popular, and I mean that would have been my preferred research too. But yeah, those are really tough to get too.
So let's if somebody could kindly drop the Texas A&M Job Board website in the chat, that would be fantastic. And thank you, Noah, for explaining kind of your situation with the master's program. Guadalupe, are you fully funded as a PhD candidate, PhD student?
So I think it's a little, it's more of a gray area for graduate departments. So fully funded and non-funded means very different things across departments and schools. So technically, I am fully funded. I don't pay my tuition, my health insurance, or anything. So for my department, the way it works is that the professor that agrees to be your PI, your advisor, becomes responsible for your finances. And so they're like your dad or something. Like they have to pay everything. And so right now my advisor, he's paying for my costs. And the only thing that for me is not really funded is my research, because my project is original research that I started once I was accepted. So it wasn't an existing project. And my advisor has some research funds left over from other grants, but I don't have that startup fund because it's not an existing project. So I am applying for grants and stuff like that. But this situation is very different. So like the Department of Anthropology here, I know that I think their graduate students get like uniform funding because their funding isn't specific to the advisor. It's just whatever the department has. So you really, once you're applying, you really need to ask these questions to the advisor that you're thinking of working under. You need to ask them, do you have money for me? How will my funding work? So that you're not, you're not hit with, oh, actually you have to pay all this out of pocket.
Yeah. Yeah. Jolie, are you funded, or did you have to, that's what I figured.
Yeah, so with MPS programs, at least the way my school works is it's just double the tuition of undergrad. So for example, like a SUNY school is a state school, so it's relatively cheap tuition. For a bachelor's degree, it's $4,000 a semester. So a professional degree is $8,000 a semester, which isn't, like, if you think about it, big picture, isn't terrible. But there are some situations where you can get like graduate assistantships and like teach a lab and get paid for that. And so there is some opportunity for assistance with tuition, but in general, they're not funded.
So I'm going to chime in. Bella, and to all, funding is extremely and highly variable when it comes to graduate programs. The diamond in the rough is the fully funded programs. Do I have a list of programs I could point you in the right direction for? No, I wish I did. So there's a couple strategies, honestly, depending on if you're going for the master's professional based degree, you're likely not to get funding. You'd be lucky if you get a teaching assistantship, where they'll give you a small stipend or even a tuition credit. It depends on the school. If you're doing a master's based thesis, there are some that are fully funded in terms they'll cover your tuition, and they'll even give you a small stipend. I was fortunate enough to be one of those people, and then the funding got cut the year after I graduated. So they're not even doing that for the master's based thesis program at my school anymore, and that was Virginia Commonwealth University. And then there's PhD funding. So there's a double-edged sword here, right? PhD is unpredictable in terms of the length of time that you're going to be doing it, but it is very research heavily focused, and it kind of lands you in a higher tier salary if you can complete a PhD, whether you end up in academia or at a federal agency like the National Park Service. You're likely to get fully funded for most. It is a conversation you should have very candidly with anybody that you're pursuing to work with for 4 or 5 years, because even if they are your mentor or your PI, aka principal investigator, they're still a colleague, and so you should have that conversation about salary up front. Jolie says she was able to get a GA stipend, tuition credit for first semester to teach a lab, but it was a unique situation that doesn't usually happen, right? So for the master's program, there are some opportunities here and there, but it also really depends on the graduate program. I will say that I have had some PhD friends that actually came in with their own funding. So if you know you're an outstanding writer and you're comfortable with playing the grants game, there's a lot of grants or opportunities for fellowship is usually the language that they'll put out there. And it's basically, if you're entering a PhD program, you can write a grant saying why you are doing X, Y, and Z and why it aligns with this grant. And if you win the grant, you can come in with money and there will be a line of mentors at your door, and you can pick and choose what you want to do. That's not to say that's an easy thing, but something to keep in mind. And when we share resources later on, there's one school that's kind of really dove into kind of seeking grants and funding that you can use those resources to check out for yourself. I'm sorry, it's not a very straightforward answer, Bella, but that's just the facts about funding in grad school.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Jolie, you want to answer Hannah's question? Is there a question going on?
Oh yeah, she just, like a little bit back up in the chat, said, what in an MPS degree, what do you do instead of a thesis?
Yeah, you want to talk about that? You're welcome to.
Sure. So at my school specifically, you had two options, which was to either take 36 credits worth of graduate classes or 30 credits worth of graduate classes and 6 credits of a professional experience. And I chose the professional experience option. So basically, I just had to take a normal class load, like 12 to 15 credits a semester of grad classes, which is like 500 level and above. And then I had to get like an internship or a fellowship or a job. And that's why I did the SIP program. I got a fellowship with the National Park Service and ESA and got some really great like in the field hands-on experience kind of doing researchy things, but also like really applied as well. And that I just literally just registered for 6 credits and had a job that paid as well and got experience. I think that's generally the better option than just taking classes, because then it's not all that dissimilar from just like a bachelor's degree. Like the experience and the actual getting to work for the federal government or whatever you want to work for is what the main reason why I wanted to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. You know, the master's professional, if you can afford to do it, and it depends on what you mean by afford. I mean, like there's pros and cons that we were talking about here, right? So it's like PhD students might be living off a really, really, really small stipend for like 5-6 years, where somebody who does a professional degree might pay all the money up front, but then earns money sooner and then pays it off. So it's all like, you know, how you manage your own finances and
Right.
and like timing and what you're really passionate about, right? You know, so being upfront with yourself and knowing your capabilities. I mean, research requires a lot of collaborative work. I'm not saying that professional degrees don't, but that's you know, you're highly dependent on the performance of your mentor, and potentially any undergrads that might be helping you along the way. And so those are things that you need to think of when you're planning out your research, or planning out your degree pursuit.
Yeah.
Katie, you want to ask your question out loud? Is that okay? You mind?
Hello.
Oh, there's 2 of you.
There
Are you both Katie?
It's Katie. I'm Katie. This is Sylvia. I actually asked the question. How would your taxes work if your income come from like a grant or like your mentor is giving you, you know, some sort of income? Like, do you guys do contractor taxes? How does that work?
That is very, very dependent on how the money comes to you. So I don't know, Guadalupe, have you worked off of grants before?
I think they're usually the ones I've had are smaller, so I didn't have that problem yet. Fingers crossed, I'll get some bigger ones soon.
Right.
But I'm not sure. I know there's there's a lot of workshops available that should be in the, like when you get to that point, that should be at your school that they give graduate students. I mean, but what I don't know, what I've known so far from students that I know, it works differently because you're not handed that money.
Yeah.
Know? So I think it's what you said, like it depends how it gets to you, if you like, if it goes to your taxes or not.
Yeah, like I was awarded a full coverage of my graduate degree program, but then I still had to pay like some student fees or something, like what Noah was describing. And it comes to you as like a stipend, as an awarded grant. And so some of it goes straight to your tuition. You never actually see the money, but then at the end you get like a form that says you got this amount of money awarded to you in scholarships, right? So I think there's like the American tax credit opportunity. When you're filling out your taxes, it gives you the option to say whether or not you got a tax credit that year because you spent this amount of money on tuition. So all I would say is if your money is going towards your tuition, then that is different than the money getting stipend to you. And that's important to know those differences. But those differences are dependent on what state you live in, and you know, like how much money was allocated to one versus the other, and whether or not you covered any tuition in addition to the scholarships that you received. And I know that for me, like my taxes got messed up, and my mom does my taxes. So I would just say, like, be sure that whenever you file your taxes, that you're upfront. And I would be a little cautious of like maybe the turbo taxes, because they're not really gonna know. Like, you might actually want to talk to a person if you're getting grants and that sort of thing. Because my partner, she worked on a grant for a year, but they wouldn't even treat her as a subcontractor. She had to write it in as like a scholarship. It was the weirdest thing. And that was through like the Smithsonian. So it's really screwy. And it's like, I feel like I'm saying a whole lot of words and not giving you any finite answers. So I apologize, but it is something that is a really kind of person by person. But just be weary, you know, like there are the 1099, the contracted workers, that those happen a lot, especially with undergrad internships. I mean, we even do it at the SIP program, right? So like you're going to be filing your taxes, and you have to remember to pull out your taxes because you're going to pay them later. So just always ask for paycheck stubs, making sure that to see whether or not those taxes are coming out of your checks, and if you need to like allocate some money for the end of the year, so you don't get hit with that big bill, stuff like that. Jolie's saying if you have a teaching assistantship, just file your taxes like normal, but that depends, right? So if it's just the teaching assistantship, but then if you have a scholarship on top of that, that can be a little tricky. Okay, that's okay, Shay. You don't have to say anything out loud. I won't make you. How did you apply to your program? That's a great question. So let's maybe just do a quick brief overview, each of you, as to like your application process. Jolie, why don't we start with you, and we'll work our way to Noah, and then Guadalupe last.
Sure. So my application process was kind of weird and perhaps not the best example of what actually happens, but because it was like the first month or so of COVID. So I didn't have to take the GREs. The GREs were canceled at the time. Usually, at least for my school, they still require GREs for MPS students, which I think is dumb. Because the reason being is that GREs generally are used to help determine things like grants and scholarships, which MPS students don't receive. So whole other thing. I didn't take the GREs. I got into the Masters of Professional Studies program at the same school that I got my bachelor's at. So basically I just had a professor that I liked, that I knew, and I was like, hey, would you be my MPS advisor? And he was like, sure. And then I just filled out the application. And since he already said, yes, I'll be your advisor, the application just went like immediately through. And I like didn't apply by any sort of deadline. It was just kind of like, I was like gerrymandered into the process. So it was a little weird in my case, but generally you would just kind of go through the same works as a normal master's student. You apply and you have advisors that have already agreed to take you on for, you know, whatever reason, whether it's thesis-based or not.
Yeah, so just a quick mention of GREs. So a lot of schools require that as a test. You have to take it, and based off your score will help determine whether or not you can get into a graduate program. I dropped a link in the chat, but let's move on to Noah. Noah, do you want to talk about your process? Did you have to take the GREs?
Yeah, so I didn't have to take the GRE either. I was fortunate enough that my school didn't actually require it, since it's a small university. But a lot of universities, a lot of big ones too, are moving away from requiring GREs now, especially with COVID. So you might be lucky and your school you want to get into might not even require it. But I knew that that I wasn't, how should I say this, that the only way I was going to be able to go into grad school was if it was fully funded, because I don't have the money or capacity to take out more loans for grad school. So the way I went about it was looking at job boards, because job boards usually have all the fully funded positions, such as Texas A&M job board. Like I mentioned before, they usually have a lot of fully funded positions with stipends and all your research is covered. So I looked through those job boards and I would apply to every single position that I thought I was qualified for and that I was interested in. I ended up applying to South Dakota State for fisheries research, and I ended up getting interviewed for that, but I didn't actually end up getting that one. And then I saw another position on the American Fisheries Society job board, which is another job board for fisheries people. And I saw the position at my school, and so I ended up applying to that one. I sent in my CV, my grades, transcript, references, stuff like that, and I ended up getting interviewed, and I got the position. So that's how I went about finding actual positions, and that was my application process.
Yeah, so I think it's important to acknowledge that you didn't get into the first or like the only program you applied to, right? So it's good to kind of put the feelers out there in multiple directions. I mean, I was kind of like Jolie. I did my undergrad and then I did my master's at the same school. I didn't want to relocate. I loved the area I was in. But you know, if I hadn't gotten into that program, I put all my eggs in one basket. It may not be a best strategy. You know, I think I was just a little lucky in that case. Okay,
yeah,
Guadalupe.
Actually,
oh, go ahead.
Sorry. I actually applied to like 15 schools, to be fair. I applied to like a lot of positions on the job board that I found. And I just got lucky with this one and I actually ended up getting it. And it was towards the end. It was like a year after I graduated that I finally got a position.
That's really good to know, because, you know, people need to hear about failures just as much as they need to hear about successes. And I'm not saying that you're a failure. In fact, I commend you for applying to that many grad programs. Holy cow, that's a lot of work. But yeah, I mean, not everybody gets into the program of their dreams. Not everybody gets into even the program that they thought they were settling for. Sometimes it takes a little while to get in the foot in the door. So kudos to you for keeping at it, Noah. And Guadalupe, do you have, how about your process with the PhD? Let's not worry too much about your master's process. How did you go about getting into your PhD? What did you have to do? What are you still having to do?
So, yeah, that's funny that you asked that, because I went from geography department, which I was doing research within biogeography and kind of ethnobotany. And so I applied to the plant biology department, which is very heavily molecular plant biology, which is not what I have. But they just happen to have an advisor that has experience within ethnobotany. And so in order to kind of stay in, I have to catch up with a bunch of prerequisites that everyone else has that I don't have coming in. So that's something that's like a conditional thing that I have to deal with still. I'm almost done. But applying, I had to retake the GRE. So I took it when my senior year of undergrad, and I did not do well at all. Very bad. And so I had to retake it. And I retook it. I did this, what was it? It was like a 6-month Magoosh online study plan. And I followed it to the T, and my GRE scores just skyrocketed up. So it was really helpful for me to kind of supplement my application. What was funny, they removed the GRE requirement after I applied. So
Of course they did.
yeah, and so I had to go through all that studying and all of that to do the GRE. And what was funny is that I got my letter of acceptance the night before my GRE exam. But they were like, you still have to take it though. So that was my experience.
Wow, that's kind of crazy. Yeah, so Magoosh, feel free to drop that link if you have a link to Magoosh as a GRE resource for those people. If you don't do well with standardized testing, you're not alone. I took a GRE. I did horribly. I actually had test anxiety, even though I studied hard, and I still got into my graduate program, and I almost graduated with a 4.0. So do not fret about the GRE too much. I did see a question come from Catherine about previous experience or qualifications that make an applicant competitive, not just for grad school, but also for fully funded programs. Is that right, Catherine? I see you. I see your face popped up there. Is there anything else you want to elaborate on?
Yeah, just sorry, I'm on my lunch break from work, but just curious what, is it multiple years of experience after bachelor's before you go into grad school that professors are looking for? Is it more like your GPA in undergrad or some combination of the above? I know it can be like a multifaceted question, but.
Well, it sounds like based off of your, you already kind of have some preconceived notions, right? So you're talking about GPA and years of experience. So I will just say, and I see the panelists kind of shaking their head too, right? So one, it's dependent on how competitive your grad school is, right? So if they're if they don't have any students and they need students, they're going to accept anybody and everybody, right? But then there's the reality of those highly competitive, fully funded programs. And I think the biggest thing is that the professors, mentors, PIs, advisors, whatever the heck you want to call them, they want to see commitment to completion. And the best ways to show commitment to completion are taking the GRE seriously is one element, taking your undergrad experience seriously, high GPAs. But you just heard from Guadalupe and from myself that we did not have great GPAs. So there are other ways to prove that. Work ethic is one, right? So having experience as an intern is phenomenal because it shows that you're dedicated and interested in the subject, right? It's a little concerning when you're doing your hardcore interest in geology, and then all of a sudden you switch to mammalogy. They're going to be like, one year you're passionate about rocks, the next year passionate about mammals. So they want to see some consistency. I will tell you, I waited tables all the way through college, and I almost always wanted to take my restaurant experience off of resumes, and then all of the mentors I had told me that the reason they picked me was because of my restaurant experience, because that showed that I had a strong work ethic and that I could multitask. So don't sell yourself short in terms of what you've done, because a lot of students do that, particularly women. So don't do that. But yeah, so something to keep in mind, though, is you really have to have strong writing skills if you're going to do a research-based program, because you are going to be expected to write. And that was a really hard thing for me. I didn't do well in my writing portion of my GREs, and I struggled with my proposal, and I struggled with my thesis. So something to keep in mind, especially when you're picking a mentor, right? So the mentor is going to want certain expectations from you. My mentor wanted somebody who could run a lab, and I have great managerial experience. So she advocated for me, and she held my hand through the writing process, but not all mentors are going to do that. Panelists, do you have anything else to add to that, or?
Yeah, I would say from what I've seen is years of experience and relevant experience is the most important. But a high GPA definitely will help as well. From the position that I've applied to in Colorado State University, where I graduated from, I thought I was a competitive candidate, but I had just graduated from my bachelor's. And so I ended up not even getting the position. I wasn't even close. I probably wasn't even top 30. And that's because a lot of people apply to it that have already had like 5 years of experience or more. You know, they graduated 5 years ago, and they've been working for maybe the National Park Service or maybe for a state agency, you know, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, California Parks and Wildlife, whatever. And so they have a lot more experience. And usually I think professors take that into account. They usually want somebody who has lots of experience and relevant experience. I think relevant experience is very important, because I believe that's the reason I got my master's thesis position, was because I had 2 years of relevant experience in what I'm researching.
I'll just add on to what Noah said. When I was talking to some of my professors about whether I wanted to do a master's thesis or an MPS, they were like, well, a master's thesis right now is not an option for you because you just graduated with your bachelor's. And I can tell you right now, no one here is going to look at your application without any experience. So if you want to do thesis-based stuff, I would say that the field experience is more important. However, even with a master's of professional studies degree, there is GPA requirements. So you can't, like, throughout your semesters there, you can't drop below like a 2.8 or something, which isn't like that hard to achieve. But even if you're not doing thesis-based stuff, there is generally GPA requirements. So that's just something to add.
I saw a comment too about letters of reference. Don't underestimate the potential of a letter of reference. Sometimes it can make or break a decision for a committee that's looking at 4 students that all have the same GPA and all have entry-level experience, or like just one internship under their belt. They're like, how do you differentiate? The reference of letter is usually the thing that will set you apart. So making genuine connections with your professors during undergrad and maintaining those connections after graduation are kind of vital. Just even letting them know that you're thinking of them. I still message with my undergrad professors here and there, the ones that matter. And they ended up becoming my friends eventually too. So that's something to keep in mind. So look, we're at the top of the hour. I'm willing to hang out for a little bit longer and answer some underlying questions. I don't know if the panelists are, but I'll try, and if they're willing to hang out there, or if anybody wants to hang out, that's fine. I still want to just show you one quick slide. If I can find it. And that's just to say thank you for your participation. And also that we have another water cooler chat that's coming up, or not water cooler chat, sorry, wrong thing. Scientists in the Parks webinar event. So in January, we're going to be talking about publishing your research inside the head of a journal. So we have a couple journals at ESA. I'm hoping to get one of our journal editors to come along and just kind of talk about the process of scientific writing and publication. I think it's beneficial, and it'll especially be beneficial if you know that you're going to go into a thesis-based program. So something to keep in mind. And I'll stop sharing my screen now because you officially saw that. And I want to say thank you to the panelists for joining and talking about your experience. I did want to dive into a little bit of like grad school culture, but we ran out of time. So like, if you want to hang back and just kind of talk for a minute, I'm available. But otherwise, I understand. I see some questions popping up, and I don't see a lot of people popping off. So that's kind of a good sign, I guess. Noah, Jolie, Guadalupe, if any of you have to run, just don't expect to have to stay, but I'm going to keep pushing for maybe another 15, 20 minutes. Okay. And I think it's important. I'm an advocate for students. You can ask all three of these people. I always advocate for students. So if I can help you in any way, I'm going to try. And and yeah, we still have to share those resources too. Also, I'll email the resources. That'll make it easier. I have all your emails since you registered, so I'll email the resources. Okay, so I see a question from, is it Darren or Darren? I'm sorry if I say it wrong. Do you want to unmute and ask your question, or I can ask it? I'll ask it for you. What if you did not maintain a good relationship with a professor and you have been out of undergrad for a few years? Okay, well, you've got to have some good relationship somewhere, right? If you've been out of undergrad for a couple of years, what have you been doing? Where have you been working? Use your boss's reference. I think you can also, if you have the capability, depends on the school though. Sometimes you have to be a student in order to volunteer for student programs, but you can look for opportunities to volunteer for a state park. You can use a reference from your SIP mentor. It doesn't necessarily have to be an academic reference. It just has to be somebody who knows you well enough that can say what your skill set is and your commitment level. And panelists, feel free to add to that if you want to. No, that's okay. That's fine. Colton, you got a question? You want to ask it? You're muted. You're welcome. No mic. Okay, fair enough. Is there points in terms of experience where MPS is not worth going for? You mean like you potentially already have 2 years of professional experience and you're contemplating whether or not you want to go the professional route, and you're not sure whether or not one outweighs the other? Julie, what do you think?
Yeah, I can answer that. So the reason I went for an MPS is that it basically helps you level up faster. I know a lot of people who go out into the field with a bachelor's degree and they have seasonal job after seasonal job after seasonal job, and they do that for like 7 years, and then they finally get in a permanent position. And I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to have to move around and jump around and constantly be on the search for jobs because of how competitive like my field is in particular. So the way that the National Park Service and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and any of those federal entities look at an MPS is exactly the same as a master's thesis. So basically, upon completion, you're automatically qualified for a GS-9 with a master's. So that is why I think it is beneficial, even if you have a lot of experience, you're not gonna just jump right into a GS-9 right away with a bachelor's. Does that make sense?
And to Jolie's point, Colton, if you can say that you automatically qualify for a GS-9 because of your degree, then that's a less of a headache for the hiring resource people, HR people that sort through all these resumes. So they can automatically kick you in as that you're qualified. And then once you get to that hiring manager, they're going to see that you're qualified in 2 ways. Right. And that's going to make you more desirable because they're going to say, you have a grad degree and you have 2 years of experience.
So you might be like a GS-11 at that point.
Technically, you have 4 years of experience. It'd be hard for you to convince people that you qualify at the PhD level without a PhD, just because that's the way that these kind of things are going. But yeah, grad school changed my life. So I was just telling the panelists earlier this, so like, did I want to do a research like a thesis-based one? No, I wanted to do a master's professional-based one, but I couldn't afford it. So I did the thesis-based because I could get it for free. And I struggled through the research process, but I did it. It took me a year longer than everybody else, but I did it. And it's worth it because the opportunities open the second they see that degree at the top of your resume. Yeah. Until you get to your
more school is never, you said I'm already knocking on GS7 qualifications. Thank you. Yeah. If you got an MPS, and actually I realized I didn't say this, but an MPS degree, at least at my school, is only 3 semesters. It's not 2 years. So it is financially difficult at first, but you're getting into those high paying, better permanent positions much faster. So that's kind of how I justified paying for grad school, but everybody's different. But everybody tells me that more school is never a bad thing. So.
And I see a question from Anna about, so you're going to get your DHA status in May, but then you're going to enter your master's program in the fall. Is that what you're shooting for?
Yeah, so I was thinking, since I get like direct hire for 2 years, that like, since it will be good until the May 2 years from now, then I could kind of like sneak in a master's during that time and like use those 2 years to like be scouting out jobs and like be, making connections. So then by the time I graduate, I'll have a master's degree and the direct hiring authority, and kind of have a window of time maybe where I can like more easily get a permanent job. Sorry.
Okay. No, it's fine. I'm just shaking my head because I think that your plan is not going to work the way you want it to. And that's not, one, you should never, if you're doing a thesis-based project, you should never bank on you graduating on time. It's almost guaranteed that you're going to graduate late. If you think you're going to graduate in May of 2024, you will probably graduate in August of 2024, and you will have completely missed your DHA window. That being said, DHA is not the answer to all things golden. So that's something that we drive home a lot in the SIP fellows, the portion that I manage, because all of the interns that work under me automatically get their DHA upon completion of the SIP program, where I know that that's a little more sporadic in the larger SIP program. So what I tell them, and this is something that I drive home quite a bit, and we're learning through this process, and the success rate of DHA can be low. Chelsea is here. Yes, Chelsea, please jump in. So Chelsea works for National Park Service. She works for the Scientists in Parks as the admin. Chelsea, go ahead. Unmute yourself. Talk about DHA and this kind of decision that she's. Did you run away?
No, I'm here.
Okay.
I just
You're just jumping around my screen, so I lost you for a second.
No, I'm still here. Okay. First of all, Anna, I'm going to have to look at your position, but our DHA positions are only in the summer and they're 12 weeks. So I don't know what your supervisor told you, but you most likely have PLC, which is another hiring authority, which is great. It also lasts for 2 years after you're done, and I can send you more info on that after this call. But yes, they both last for 2 years. DHA and PLC work a little bit differently, so I'm gonna have to check to make sure. I know which one you have, but I'm 99.9% sure that you will have PLC. So when you're done, we'll get you that certificate, and yeah, you can use it for 2 years. A big thing that you need to know is you have 2 years until and you have to start within that 2 years. So you can't be looking for a position and have one in mind and be in touch with, a supervisor and like, yeah, I want to hire you. But if the 2 years expires before your actual start date, then you can no longer use it. I also want to say, Katie mentioned direct hire gets paused while you're in school. That does not how that works. If you do have direct hire authority, so Jolie has that, you have to be in school, enrolled in school while you're in the internship.
And that program that you are enrolled in at that time, once you graduate with that degree, your 2 years starts. So Jolie's 2 years doesn't start until she graduates in, I don't know, whenever that is, but that's when her 2 years will start. For PLC, it starts as soon as your term ends. So I think for like everyone on the call, when your term ends, if you've reached the required number of hours, which is 640, that's when your term, or that's when your hiring authority will start. Sorry, I'm just thinking all these questions. We may have to have a separate thing about DHA, PLC, hiring authorities is extremely confusing. I don't want to take that on this call, but I can send out my email because I saw someone mention that, and I can answer any questions that you guys have. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, definitely, Chelsea. That would be fantastic.
Cool.
And maybe I can just give you everybody who's here, and you can just send out random information. But just so everybody knows, Chelsea is the DHA person behind the scenes for SIP. So she actually does know what she's talking about. And I'm really happy she was here because I was going to struggle through trying to clarify some of those things, that all the eccentricities that DHA is. So I guess the PLC and the DHA thing, it is very advantageous to have it. Yes.
Yes.
But it's not the only way you can get your foot in the door with a federal position. And it's something to keep in mind, especially when you already have connections to MPS employees by being in the SIP program. So maintaining those relationships as you enter grad school, even if your status goes away, is crucial to getting your foot in the door. So that's something to keep in mind. And if you already know several federal workers, like, you know, not just MPS, but U.S. Fish and Wildlife, USGS, while DHA won't transfer to every single different agency, it will transfer to some different agencies. It's good to know all those people, and it's good to stay in touch with them, because one of these days somebody's going to say, I have a position, it's going to be posted, you'll have to compete for it, but they're going to be looking for your application. So something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I apologize. I should have introduced myself. Yeah. Hi, Chelsea Benning, Scientist in Parks, Partnership Lead. I deal with anything hiring authority related. So yeah, that's my email. Reach out to me. We're also working on getting a much better process in place for all the hiring authorities with more information for folks and kind of tracking to see where everyone is on hours and all of that. So be on the lookout for that.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Chelsea. That was really great. And Jolie, I see you have to hop off. So I think we're going to kind of wrap this up, everyone. I want to say thanks to the panelists again. I will reach out to everybody that came with you know, resources for you to get into grad school, to check it out. Feel free to email myself. Jolie's offered her email, and good luck with grad school. You're not alone. There's a lot of people that have been through it, and you know, you can do it. I believe in you. You can do it. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jessica and panelists.